A few weeks ago, no one imagined that we'd have accomplished what we did here tonight in New Hampshire. No one could have imagined it. For most of this campaign, we were far behind. We always knew our climb would be steep. But in record numbers, you came out and you spoke up for change. And with your voices and your votes, you made it clear that at this moment, in this election, there is something happening in America. There is something happening when men and women in Des Moines and Davenport, in Lebanon and Concord, come out in the snows of January to wait in lines that stretch block after block because they believe in what this country can be. There is something happening. There's something happening when Americans who are young in age and in spirit, who've never participated in politics before, turn out in numbers we have never seen because they know in their hearts that this time must be different.
Well, we're going to get into it. We're going to get into it in this video and subsequent videos. This is a first part of a 4-part series that I'm working on. And I just have to tell you up front that this particular video is for educational purposes only. And hopefully that'll preserve it out in Never Never Land. We're going to get into this video. I would encourage you first of all, though, to grab yourself a cup of joe. I am working on my cup of joe right here, a cup of coffee. And just before we get into it, I would like to encourage you to go ahead and scoot on over to my Etsy shop where I sell the very mug that I showed you. It's etsy.com//shop/Timotheus Enterprises. And this is the way that I fund everything I do. As of right now, there's no other sponsorship. There's no other money flowing in except from my other business. So let's get into this video. This video here is the rebranding of America. And I don't know if you could tell where that audio came from, but it was in fact from the speech that Obama gave when he became President of the United States, but not his inaugural speech. It was the speech after the elections. But I want you to notice in some of the things that he stated, and I want you to pay particular attention to a few things that he said. He said, "You made it happen, and it won't get done without you." We're going to get into some of that. We're going to get into some of that stuff in this video. He said a lot of good things in his inaugural speech as well. But I want to go into these steps or stages of the rebranding of America and come back and touch on that very thing, words that were spoken. So let me back up and share with you the actual 4 parts of the series of these videos. And the first one is the one we're in right now, the rebranding of America. We're going to have 7 steps that we're going to look at. And I'm not saying that this is the all-inclusive steps. These are just steps that I've been researching for the past couple of weeks. And I also want to say that everything that I've come up with, you can find out on the internet yourself, except for one thing that I had extreme trouble finding, maybe 2, but we'll deal with that later. So this is the first video. The second video is going to be Follow the Yellow Brick Road, and we're going to hone in on the main characters of that particular fairy tale and fictional writing. The third and fourth videos are going to focus on what it would take to fix where we're at. And let me say this. This is not a partisan or a political party focus. Okay? This is an individual focus. Mirror, mirror on the wall. Taking a look at ourselves to fix any and all problems that we are facing in this country. And the fourth one is one nation under who? One nation under who? So that's what we're looking at in the future for this series of videos, as far as freedom and survival, and as far as the politics side of what I'm doing. So the thing that we have to understand is that we are very good as a people at pointing the finger, and not that we shouldn't point the finger, but we are told to first take the pole out of our own eye before we pull the sliver out of somebody else's eye. And I think that that is something that we need to look at when we talk about mirror, mirror on the wall. In this video, I'm going to be looking at the 7 steps of the rebranding of America. Forgive me for looking down. The documentation for my teleprompter would only allow for a very short script, I'm finding out. And I have 54 pages. And if we were to do this really in depth, these 54 pages would turn into 2 weeks in a stack, like this, of documentation. The steps that we're going to look at in this video are the changing of definitions of words and definitions, the rebranding of your mind through education and programming, the migration of the political parties. That's critical and key, and I'm going to explain that. You probably already can surmise as to what that would look like and does look like. The rewriting of history. That would be American history and world history. We're going to look at economic reform and the restructuring of sex. Sexes, definitions, societal norms. We're going to look at that. And then we're going to look at the rebranding of religion in America. So grab your coffee. Actually, let me do it this way. So grab your coffee and sit back and let's go over this together. And let's find out where this rebranding is leading us. I don't know if you understand what rebranding really is or what it means, but I think if you stop and think back through your life, even of how companies would rebrand themselves, you will begin to understand how the country as a whole is actually in the midst of transformation. And by the way, this is not a new phenomenon. This is not something that is recent. This is something that has been going on for a very long time. But businesses do this rebranding thing often enough, and they do it in the likes of new and improved. They come out, and if their usefulness of a certain brand or image, they feel that it has peaked, they come out with the new and improved, both in product display as well as their own logos. And sometimes they hire the new face for their new image, a new model, a new personality. We see this in the insurance industry, where you'll have TV personalities come on to sell insurance. And the list goes on and on and on. What they do is they feel that their current branding and identification is fully matured and is capped to its fullest usefulness, and then they back it down, they shut it down, and then they bring the same business and the same products back as if it is something new. They push the new thing to the hilt, full steam ahead. And so I've noticed that businesses, as in retail products, are not the only ones that do this. They are, in fact, the first ones that you would basically say that would engage in this. But I've noticed influencers on YouTube and Rumble, basically the same ones, will do the same exact thing, and this is how it works. And they do this in waves and droves, and there's a reason for it. For them, there's a reason for it, and I'm going to explain that. And I don't think that this is the same reason that we find a rebranding in the United States. There's a fundamental reason why there's a rebranding in the U.S. going on. And in fact, it is, well, we'll look at it, but it turns into the global spin. But influencers do this rebranding in waves and droves, and they follow one another like Mother Goose. They ride trends, and that's the thing with influencers. They ride trends. A lot of them don't have an original creative bone in their body, and some of them do, and they can put together a video, but they ride the trends. And this is what I've seen in influencers, in podcasting. I've seen it in van life. I've seen it in survival podcasts and video and vlogs. I've seen it in political podcasts and blogs, and I've seen it in the photography and video, blogs as well. The photographers and podcast and video streamers, they'll do something like, check out my big, huge, brand new studio, man. This thing is a castle. It's awesome, blah, 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 blah. And the next thing you know, every Tom, Dick, and Harry out there that is putting together YouTube videos is building a new studio. Once the usefulness of that wears off and they can't come up with any other videos, then they go on to the next thing. They rebrand themselves and go, oh, I just sold the big studio. I'm going into a minimalist studio. I'm going back to the starting out in the bedroom type of thing, where I had a studio in the bedroom. Van lifers do the same thing. Oh, boondocking is great. Living in Walmart's parking lots are great. Oh, this and that and the other thing. And then van life with friends in van life is great. And then all of a sudden it's, I'm having a mental breakdown. Or, oh, the repairs on this van are getting to be too much. And then you see everybody else doing the same thing and following the trend because they've topped off everything they can talk about in those aspects of whatever they're talking about. Same thing with survival. It's, radios, self-defense, food preparation and preservation, and bunkers, and this. It goes on and on and on and on. So if you stop and think about it, and you look at how we have witnessed companies with products on the shelves at the store do this, and we have witnessed these things in media. All of the major networks have done this about every 10 years. And then you see this through the new social media, the new norm in social media. You can see how and why the rebranding of America is being pulled off without a hitch. Because to us, it's everyday normal life. The difference is that in America, you can skip the new and improved and just go with the new in steps and in stages. And as Obama said, it wouldn't get done without you. Furthermore, there have been those on the front lines telling us what exactly is going on. And many of us don't like personalities. Many of us don't like the presentation. We listen to the little devil on our shoulder, so to speak, called the mainstream media, and whoever pumps crap through them, calling these others conspiracy theorists, and 9 times out of 10 they turn out to be correct. And I'm not saying they're always correct, but they've been right a lot. And they've been labeled opposition. They've been labeled extremists, Nazis. They've been deplorables. Anybody that opposes any change is a deplorable. Any change in a certain way is a deplorable. They have been jailed and fined through the nose. And there have been those who have been assassinated. And I'm specifically speaking, and I could not find anything of this. This is one of the things I had difficulty finding. About 9 years ago, there was a husband and wife team that created a documentary, and it was getting ready to go mainstream, and they were disappeared. And I can't find anything about it. But the list goes on. Now we've got the likes of Patrick Bet-David with Valuetainment. Even our own beloved Watson Prunier with Battle for Freedom will hit on these things all the time. And while he is sharing his opinion, he is bringing out actual headlines that are hitting our streets as he speaks. I'm thinking of Glenn Beck. I'm thinking of, and there are some that are way out there. There's some that are just the hair's on fire all the time. But if you stop and go back, Redacted. And there are questions. I have questions about a lot of these people. But the point of the matter is that we have been told over and over and over and over again, and as soon as the mainstream media or somebody else vilifies them, we wash our hands of them because we want to live in our own little normalcy bias. And Obama said it. Without you, this change could not happen. And this change is happening at breakneck speed. So that ought to tell you something. But this is not a new phenomenon. As I have said, this thing goes way back. This country has been rebranded time and time besides, but it continues to march on is the point. And anytime anything comes up, it gets washed. Emails, for instance. And I've said these things over and over and over again. How about Fast and Furious with the guns? How about, and you list 50 things or whatever. But all through the life cycles of this country, and actually every country on earth for that matter, there has been two realms at work, the seen and the unseen, and the good and the evil. And let me tell you right now, do not make this a political party thing. This is not a Democrat or a Republican thing. And if you think it is, then you're a part of the problem. And I'm not saying one party is faster than the other, but both trains are leading in the same direction. I've been saying this for 30 years. Both trains are leading in the same direction. One is just going a little faster than the other. And it's doing this. And if you don't believe me, you're as blind as a bat. It only takes a little bit of looking to see what I'm talking about. But let's continue on. In the political spectrum, the changes have come every 4 to 8 to 10 years. And some were monumentous and noted and noticed, and some were not noticed at all. Some were taught in school history, and some was not. Let's go ahead and talk about some of these changes that we've witnessed over the years. And I'm not saying that these changes are changes that are conclusive or inclusive or anything like that. I'm just touching on some to give you an idea of how things have progressed and how things have changed. Let's start off with the Revolutionary War against England. No tax on tea, and you're not coming to get our guns. Those were the two things that we went to war over with England in the Revolutionary War. and so-called won our independence. How about the Civil War? The war between the states. Was that not a transforming moment or transforming era in American history? What about things like presidential assassinations? What did they do to change the landscape of America's societies as a whole? How about the assassination of heads of movements that were picking up steam and people didn't want to be able to culminate into a viable resolution? How about the proclamation of emancipation? How about the Industrial Revolution? All of these were eras and aspects of transformation and rebranding of the United States of America, including the world wars and other wars that were not world wars. The list goes on and on and on. How about we talk about things that are just slightly more subtle, just a little more subtle, and yet are things that we take for granted because we're so used to them. How about the making of the two-party political system? That happened between 1824 and 1840. It took 15 years to actually bring a two-party system of Democrats and Republicans into the normal everyday life of every American. How many of us remember the North American Treaty? I wasn't even alive with the North American Treaty, but the North American Treaty allowed the United States to join forces with other allies across the Atlantic, not the North American Treaty, the North Atlantic Treaty, my apologies. It gave us alliances across the Atlantic Ocean and opened the door for military unification as well as economic unification of the Eastern blocs. Another wrenching transformation occurred during the Great Depression, and Franklin Roosevelt introduced the new Great Society. That changed the economic landscape of America forever, and we are now in full bloom in that great new society, along with the Industrial Revolution. Something that you may not think about, something that has been back on the stage in the past 2 years, is two things that are related. And the first would be the birth control pill was introduced May 9th of 1960. And on the heels of that, we had then Roe versus Wade. On the heels of that, we had prayer taken out of the public schools. And I'm not asking whether you agree with these things or not. What I'm telling you is that there has been a rebranding of the United States, and we have lived it, and without us, it would not happen. We also saw the introduction to fake money. And then from fake money, the fake money was taken off of the gold standard. That was an aspect of the rebranding of the United States of America. What about the American flag? Is it even recognized in our schools today? That's a legitimate, sincere question. I've been out of school for a long time. I don't know the answer to that. But based on other things that go on in our public education, I sincerely wonder if we know what the American flag is and what it really does stand for. Let's move on in the rebranding of America in past history, things that we would recognize. What about the Reagan Revolution? when Reagan come on the scene, that wasn't his first political move. He first made his first political move in 1960 when he came to the aid of two other politicians. One was Nixon, and the other was a Bailey or a Bentley dude. And at that time, Reagan went from being a Democrat to being a Republican. The migration of the political parties. We're going to get into that as a subject on its own. Then President Reagan became president, and George Bush Sr. was his vice president, during which time George Bush Sr. freely spoke of a new world order. You see, folks, I'm not blowing smoke. I'm not constructing a new conspiracy theory to create anything that is not there. These are factual, historical events that have changed this country one step at a time. And we as a people are involved in it, and you cannot get around the fact. Let's continue before I actually get into what I'm going to talk about in my 7 points. Don't think that Vice President Bush, who spoke of the New World Order freely, didn't have his share as a Republican in these steps of rebranding. Does Kuwait or Iraq ring a bell? How about President Bill Clinton, former President Bill Clinton? He brought about not only 2 decades later, 3 decades later, or 3.5 decades later, of the hippie movement, the revolution hippie movement, the free love and sex hippie movement, sex and rock and roll hippie movement. And I'm not dissing sex. I mean, that's a God-given natural thing. But when it becomes a movement, maybe a person ought to take a look at it. But Clinton brought it out of the public domain and took it straight to the White House and brought sex on the Hill to the forefront in the public's eye. And he was just the head of state, so to speak. Remember the Madame's Black Book scandal? The Black Book scandal. How about Pizzagate? And now we're seeing porn videos made literally, and look, this is not a security video, some are, but they're actually engaging in purposefully videotape recording themselves for the purpose of disseminating these tapes. If that's not the legitimate definition of pornography, I don't know what is. And we're seeing this happen on Capitol Hill, in our heads of states buildings, and it's not just a one-time occurrence. We're also told that they have sex cages, and they do all kinds of lewd garbage in these sex cages. With our so-called leadership of so-called representatives doing all these things, as well as those who work for them. And these are the people that decide, supposedly because they no longer represent us, decide the direction of this country. And they make the laws to direct the nation. They use the front door, the back door, and the tunnels. And then we had Obama, before all this, talk about hope and change and fundamental transformation. Do you remember that? And I don't know if you recognize the crowds, but he had a lot of crowd, way more crowd than Biden ever dreamed of. Obama had a lot of crowds in his rallies, a lot. And so here we have where we find ourselves in the midst of the rebranding of the United States of America. Yes, they can, and yes, they are. I think I'll leave all the stuff with Obama alone. Let's get into these actual aspects of rebranding. Let's talk about the changing of definitions. I don't know if you really understand the significance of this or not, and I'm going to try my best to explain this in a way that is understood and as truthful and impactful as it can possibly be. So the changes in definitions goes like this. We call a good writing wordsmithing, but we also put the twist of twisting what we say and write to mean or innuendo something completely different than what is intended. And in both instances, it's called wordsmithing. The wordsmithing is a forming of words to create an outcome. Wordsmithing in itself is an art, and I believe it's an art. It's a gift. Those who write and have the art of writing, the gift and art of writing, to become great authors are ones who are skilled and are experts in the crafting of words to tell a story. And whatever story it is that they might be telling, wordsmithing is their craft. And in and of itself, there's nothing wrong with wordsmithing. In fact, it's a very powerful gift. It's a very powerful creative gift for those who actually have it. Now, whether they use it innocently or whether they use it for nefarious activities is a whole nother ballgame. Let's go through and take a look at what this might look like. So in the changing of definitions, let's think about words that are everyday words that in their core mean good things. Let's talk about being patriotic. Or maybe they don't mean good things. Maybe it's like left wing, right wing, extremism, neo-fascism, Nazism, nationalism. And however those words are used to determine a meaning is the difference between whether the definition of that word is actually being changed or not. And I'm going to explain what I mean. And we see this again in the social media era, where what people of when I was a kid, we would say things like, and our lingo would be different, and it would have been different from our grandparents, so to speak. Maybe not so much our parents, but our grandparents. And we would say things like dude or gnarly or cool or something like that. Nowadays, they're saying things that what I think means something completely different. For instance, if they like something, they call something sick. or dope, or it's banging, or clutch. These are just a few examples. In today's society, in social media, all of those things mean something good. And so those definitions, by the influence of society, are in certain contexts have their meanings changed. In the rebranding of America, the same things happen. And we see this with the words conspiracy, right wing, conservative, extremism, nationalist, patriotic, and liberal, and left wing. Pretty much any and all of these words that have any political influence of swaying a person's mind and reprogramming them to the rebranding of what they want society to look like are up for grabs. And some of these are words that we're going to take a look at, or rather, if you just understand how they're used and can be used in an incorrect way. Let me explain. How about the word honorable? Honorable means honorable, does it not? How about in the context of a person that is serving the United States of America as a public servant or as a military personnel? When we speak of them serving honorably, we have the connotation of saying certain things. They did due diligence to carry out their duties without wavering and to the point where they were effective in doing their job, whatever that job may be. They followed orders and they did their job well. It kind of looks like this. For somebody who gets out of service, they carry with them a file that is called a DD-214. It lists, and it doesn't list all of their accomplishments. Some of them are redacted, depends on who they are. You have a long form DD-214, you have a short form DD-214. I've got two DD-214s. One lists a lot of the extra things that went with being an NCO, and the other one does not. One included it and one did not. Don't ask me why, that's just the way it is. But there's one line on that DD-214 that makes all the difference in the world, in my life and in the life of those who I interact with, particularly in employment and or service to this day. Makes all the difference in the world, and that line states that I was honorably discharged from my contract. Others would say general or dishonorable. And so goes the meaning if it is taken in the context of the way it is supposed to be meant. But what does this really mean, and does it mean the same thing today as it did in May or July of 1986? Now, I know I have buddies that have gotten out. They've done their 20, or they've done their 22, their 23, their 24, their 26, or whatever. They've got honorable discharges. Did their honorable discharge when they got out mean the same thing that mine did when I got out? And the words on the paper are the same. It's in the same box on the same line. But if the leadership has changed, those words might just mean something different to somebody else. And you say, how can that be? Simple. It's really, really simple. And this is the crux of the rebranding of the United States of America. What if I or any other service member from World War II till today took our honorable discharge and stood in front of Hitler, or stood in front of Saddam Hussein, or stood in front of Stalin, or stood in front of Castro, or stood in front of the dude in China, or stood in front of Kim. I had his name and then I lost it. Kim. What if we all stood in front of those leaders? Would they recognize our service as honorable to the United States of America? Or would they recognize us as patriots of America and an enemy of their state? Now, why in this country are we calling citizens who don't agree with us, and I'm talking, hear me carefully because it goes both ways, and I'm a party to this because of certain things that are going on. And I'm going to explain it. But understand this. Those who are fundamentally transforming America probably would not say, I served honorably. To the fact that I despise tyranny, I despise taxation without representation, I despise the fact that we have income tax when it was supposed to be, and property tax when they were supposed to be eradicated after World War I. And I despise the fact that if you owe the federal government or a state government or a county government or a city government $1 on your taxes, they can take your entire property and estate over $1. Now, am I speaking honorably? Who am I honorable to? Because you're going to have two people standing side by side, and one is going to say he is honorable, and the other is going to say he is not. And this is how words and definitions in a country that is being rebranded get changed. Do you understand that? Let's take a look at one more word. Patriotism. Same idea. What does it mean to be a patriot of the United States? The ideal definition in a dictionary is a patriotism that has love and devotion and attachment to their country or state, as well as their ethnicities, and in this country, the diversity of such, and the culture and political and historical landscapes. Patriotism over the years has not always been positive, because when a country is going through a revolution, whoever wins that revolution determines who's a patriot and who is not. And that's where we're finding ourselves in the United States of America as we speak. Again, the word patriot signifies a person who loves his country and is ready to boldly support it and defend it. But if the country's fundamental landscape is being transformed into something, let's say from freedom to tyranny, or let's say from freedom to communism, or from freedom to dictatorship, or from free enterprise to fascism and socialism, then these words are going to get changed. The meanings and the context are going to be changed. And whoever wins is going to determine what that is. And right now, we are being programmed, and we've been being programmed for quite some time, as to what these changes are going to mean in the future. Oh, let's see. I'm not going to go through all that. It's just a lot of stuff. I might keep that. There's one more word that I would like to visit, and that is the word racist. That word has been changed in our country recently to have us think that it means one thing when those who speak it are meaning something different. Before I get to this, I want to give you one more example. Under the guise of patriotism, the programming looks like this. Let me ask you a question. What is it to be patriot? What is it to you to be patriotic? And what is the first thing that comes to your mind to make you think that you're being patriotic? Let me give you a clue. Let me just tell you what I'm thinking. And it's not the Pledge of Allegiance of the flag, though that has been under attack, and it's not the national anthem, though they've tried to change that as of recent. But patriotism as an action has been fundamentally being reprogrammed under the guise of thank you for your service. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't be thankful for a person's service. I'm not saying you shouldn't be thankful for the military that serves honorably, defends your freedoms, will put their life in front of yours to save it, and the same thing for law enforcement who would do the same thing. So long as they will abandon their paycheck when tyranny orders them to do something that is unpatriotic to our fundamental law, and that is to love our neighbor as ourselves, as per the supposedly the Constitution was written out of biblical context and biblical principle. But let me ask you this. What does it really mean to be a patriot? If to be a patriot means to love your country, have affection for your country, support your country, boldly stand for your country, then does thanking someone for their service, is that really the embodiment of being patriotic? And I'm not saying you're not patriotic when you thank somebody for their service. That's not what I'm saying. You know what a lot of times what my comeback is? You're welcome. And either you're worth serving or be somebody that's worth serving. If you're patriotic, be somebody that's worth giving my life for. It's pretty simple, isn't it? Be an upstanding American who holds dear the biblical context of the embodiment of the laws of this country that actually reflect a biblical worldview. And I'm not talking about a religious worldview. I'm talking about the principles that are godly, that uphold everybody's rights as an individual based on made in the image of God, which we find in our preamble. Is that not what being patriotic really is? But yet, the powers that be are shifting our thinking so that while we think we're being patriotic, we're actually being distracted while there's rebranding going on. And when we come out the other side, all these things are going to mean something totally and completely different. because there's going to be a whole new type of government at the helm. Not we the people, something entirely different. But let's get into the term racist. And I've touched on this before. It can mean ethnicity, but by and large, it comes out of, and I'm just going to touch on this real quick. It is one term that is being pushed by politics and the mainstream media and the educational institutions, as well as the churches and public at large. Remember what Obama said, without you, these changes will not happen. And people mimic the rhetoric, they speak the rhetoric, they think the rhetoric, and don't even know what they are saying. The synonym of racist is to relate or characterized by racism, or be characterized by racism as having a reflection or fostering a belief that race is a fundamental detriment of human traits and capabilities or capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. What is this not saying? What this is not saying is that there is the human race that is separate from all other aspects of living creatures and creation on the planet. And it is convoluting the difference between race and ethnicities. Because you have the human race and you have different ethnicities. Every tongue, every tribe, every nation means ethnicities. It does not mean kingdoms. It means nations. It means ethnicities. And simply put, the color of one's skin is the creative smile of God on humanity when He made man in His own image and likeness. Yet we are one race, the human race. But the rhetoric from the politicians, from the media, from the educational system, and from the churches are convoluting the meanings so that when the time comes and they want to do genocide just like Hitler, just like Stalin, just like Poe, just like all of these others that killed off Guerrero, I think his name was, that killed off thousands of people and millions of people, there won't be a conscious bone in anybody's body. And we now have, again, the rebranding of America in the word racist. Folks, this is how the rebranding of America is happening under the changing of the words and the definition of those words based on who's saying it and the context in which it is being said, and the meaning and the intent. And oftentimes, they know what they're doing. They're saying it as if they mean what you think they mean. The whole time they're talking about something completely different. And it comes out in months and years and terms later. Now, let's go to the rebranding of America through the reprogramming of your mind and education. Somewhat tied to the last category, isn't it? Now, if you don't think this has been happening in the last 30 years, think again. I've already showed you politically, all the way back into the 1800s, how this rebranding has been coming about. And the education system has been taken over by those who have been doing the rebranding from way back when. It was taken out of the hands of the parent. it was put in the hands of public school locally, and then it was put in the hands of the public school regionally, and then it was put in the hands of the public school statewide, and then fedwide. And if you don't think that your local region doesn't get their curriculum from the fed level, then you are sadly mistaken. But I want to take you back, about 2.5 decades ago or so, when this war and this rebranding, and I call it a war, it's a subversive war. It's a softening of the indigenous people, just like when we go into a country and we get them riled up and we soften them up and get them to change allegiances, and we then get them prepared for a revolution. The same thing has been going on in education. And I want to take you back to 2.5 decades ago when our oldest daughter was born and on the threshold of going to school or not. And I didn't pull up any documentation, but I distinctly remember a change in my mind about schooling when it was time for our daughter to go to kindergarten. The Michigan Board of Education made a declaration to the parents of Michigan. And that declaration was simple. It was bold, it was newsworthy, it made headlines, and it was in your face. And they said, when your child steps 1 foot on our school bus and school buses, your child is no longer your child, but your child belongs to us. And I said, no, my children do not belong to you. And my children are not going to be educated by you. They're not going to be raised by you. They're not going to be nurtured by you. And they're not going to be trained by you. That is when we made the decision to homeschool our children. And by the way, whether you like it or not, we have 2 Marines in the family. We have a missionary in the family. We have a certified electrician as a child. We have 1 Marine is going in to be an electrical engineer, already works for a huge company. I'm not going to tell you who and what. And another child works in electrical. And then yet another one works in, I really can't tell you. The point of the matter is that if you think that homeschooling your child or any child is a detriment, that they will not function in society and not contribute as a patriotic American, you are sorely mistaken. And every one of our children are upholding themselves as what I would consider patriots. And they don't always sound like it because they sound a lot like me. But I'm going to tell you right now, we love our country for what it is supposed to be and what it has afforded us to be and allowed us to do. But what we don't like is the rebranding and the restructuring into this fascist ball of wax of tyranny and taxation and military, unwarranted military might overseas rather than protecting our borders here. We're not even protecting our borders here. These are the things we despise. And yes, this video is for educational purposes only. And no, these things are not conspiracy theory. They're in-your-face facts. But let's go ahead and look at the educational system for just a moment. If you understand that a state's educational system is derived from and handed down and dictated by the federal educational level, then there's no question about as to its origin and therefore the agenda. We have recently saw the shift into Common Core, participation trophies, safe spaces for the spineless. And all this goes up all the way from kindergarten through K-12 into our secondary schools of higher learning. This stuff is, in fact, a reality. You can't deny it. So to say that there isn't a rebranding or hasn't been and is not being a rebranding of the American educational system as a whole, then you're a part of the problem. And I don't care if you're a good teacher. I don't care if you're a good teacher in the system. That's not what I'm talking about. I don't care if you're married to a teacher. I don't care if you're a professor. If you're towing the line, you're a part of the problem. If you deny it, you're a part of the problem. If you're helping to shape history into what you want it to be, that is un-American or anti-American, you're a part of the problem. If you this goes into the fundamentalist level of socialism and fascism. It really does. And under these new guidelines, there are no absolutes. And that's the tragedy. When there's no absolutes in the fundamentals of reading and arithmetic, then you have no fundamental basis for absolutes when you dictate good science or anything else, because you are eroding the foundation of solid instruction. And these things also, and this principle also transfers into the laws of physics. You can't understand the laws of physics if you don't have absolutes. Now, I'm not saying that everything is an absolute. That's not what I'm saying. But when you have something, as in good science, that is observable over and over and over and over again to dictate a baseline and a standard for an absolute, and you bring Common Core into the equation, you will never recognize the absolute. You can't. It doesn't process. It also is going and being transferred into our legal system, where we've gone from constitutional law to case law. With case law, there's no absolute. There's no foundation except history. Not a history of a documentation of basis and standard, but a documentation of change. Now, if these fundamental changes in our education system go from the local level to the regional level to the state level to the federal level, I'm going to tell you they're tied to the global level, and that's the problem. Now, before you say I'm out of my mind, before you say it, get on the internet and start looking it up. Just do it. Let me read what I pulled off of the internet from the UN's website. The core problem preventing the United Nations takeover of the K-12 education in America by Jim Kelly on April 26, 2013. Since the 1948 adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the United Nations has developed a common core international human rights principle. Rights principles, policies, practices that constitute a global ethical religion. a common core principle, common core education, and common core religion. Throughout the Common Core State Standard Initiative, CCSSI as it's referred to, with the cooperation of state governors, President Barack Obama and the United States Department of Education are using the UN's human rights Common Core indoctrination into K through 12 students to fundamentally transform America. Now, this comes from Crisis Magazine. At the request of educators, I wrote the World Core Curriculum, the product of the United Nations, a meta-organization. Are you starting to hear the language? A meta-organization of human and planetary evolution. Robert Mueller, the former UN Assistant Secretary General. The education reform known as Common Core State Standards, CCSS, for grades K through 12 adopted by 40 plus states and more than half of the U.S. dioceses is designed to produce a universal workforce ready. Shovel ready jobs, anybody? Shovel ready education, anybody? Population prepared to self-identify as global citizens. This is the fundamental transformation, rebranding of America through our education system. Do not call me a conspiracy theorist. This is in your face. Many education professionals have been critical of the CCSS, but even they may not know the philosophical reason behind why financiers like Bill Gates have bankrolled Common Core system. The same source of funding for Common Core in the United States are promoting similar methods and aligning texts worldwide through auspices of the United Nations. These things are all tied together. The Crisis Magazine readers learned that Common Core is financed with over $150 million from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the collaboration of Gates Foundation, and the United Nations Education, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, in other words called UNESCO. We've heard that before, and it has been well published. In addition, Gates, on behalf of Microsoft Corporation, signed a 26-page cooperation agreement in 2004 between Microsoft and UNESCO to develop a master curriculum, which introduces benchmarks and assessments. The agreement stipulates that UNESCO will explore how to facilitate content development, and some have decried the Common Core as nationalization of American education. Far more dangerous, however, is the globalism of Common Core that demotes American values, undermines American constitutional principles, and detaches students from their families and faith. Common Core is simply the newest attempt in the decade-old battle, outcome-based education goals of 2000. Boy, does 2000 ring a bell. Y2K? And impose a UN globalist worldview aimed at peace, sustainability, and economic stability at the expense of freedom. Briefly, the globalist philosophy calls for the establishment of a global culture based on a commitment to sustainable processes, and I've talked about this, and humanistic ethics, not biblical ethics, not godly ethics, humanistic ethics, to ensure world peace and fair distribution of natural resources. The UN serves as the hub for this globalist hope, this humanistic hope. Adherents believe that some form of world congress and world citizenship is the end point of political evolution, and therefore it is inevitable. What is not certain, in their view, is the time of fulfillment. Bingo. I think it's around the corner, folks. Now, let's bring this into public view. Let's take it and marry the education, the political, and the media and marry it up into the public view. You're going to like this. You're going to love this. Based on entertainment, what do you think the ties with Hollywood, the UN, and the global entertainment industry all have to do with it? Let's talk about the role of publicly known figures such as actors and actresses, musicians and entertainers, and athletes in this rebranding. Kanye West wrote a song, No Child Left Behind. By the way, that was a George Bush Jr. spinoff, and that came straight out of the UN. Now you understand why I said it knows no political boundaries of left versus right or Democrat versus Republican. Because you have to understand how they changed the words and their meanings and divisiveness. You also have to understand that controlled opposition is not of God. God says a divided house cannot and will not stand. So therefore, the author of controlled opposition is the devil. And when you have controlled opposition on two sides of a so-called aisle, then that will tell you what the origin is. It only stands to reason. If you don't like what I'm saying, you're a part of the problem. Sorry, but that's the facts. You just have to think this through a little bit. So let's take a look at these public figures. These people were brought in and offered ambassadorship to the public by the UN and accepted. I'm going to list a few of them. Angelina Jolie, we all knew that. Antonio Banderas, Selena Gomez, Lawrence Fishburne from The Matrix, Katy Perry, Lucy Liu, T. Leone, Emma Watson, Connie Britton, Danny Glover, Alyssa I'll take that back. Alyssa Milano, Angie Harmon, Ricky Martin, Serena Williams, Orlando Bloom, Susan Sarandon, Whoopi Goldberg, Roger Moore, Shakira. Had to think about that one. Jackie Chan, Liam Neeson, David Beckman, Nicole Kidman, Joel Madden, Maya Farrow, Kristen Davis, Anne Hathaway, Kate Blanchett, George Clooney, Geisel, Gisele Bündchen, Alec Weck, Harry Belafonte, Charlize Theron, Stevie Wonder, Nana Muscuri, Naomi Watts, Edward Norton, Annie Lexon, I think I already said Connie Britton, and Ian Somerhalder. These are various public figures that are ambassadors of goodwill from the UN to the global public. So don't think that this global UN rebranding, even within the US, leaves Hollywood, leaves entertainment, leaves actresses and actors out, leaves athletes out, or leaves musicians out. They do not. Now let's talk about the migration of political parties. And in this, we're going to see how I don't want to say this, how the political landscape to rebrand America has gone from a representation of we the people, by the people, for the people, to a two-party system into something else that most people don't even recognize. And I don't know if you recognize this based on what you see now, but the political Communist Party of America, though it seemed was very unsuccessful in making any headway in this country, has had their hand in the makings of where we are today. Now, they came out of the Bolshevik Revolution from Stalin's revolutionary days and set foot on this soil. It's in their own paperwork. It's in their own historical documents. And it's been written about. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the Communist Party of America and talk about it just briefly. And then we're going to see how, and I've already alluded to, we're going to see how that the political party migration has taken place. But before I do, I want to bring to the forefront of your thinking the following. The Communist Party of America has rebranded itself by infiltrating the Democratic Party. So the Communist Party of America was the Communist Party of America until the 1800s, or at least until the two-party system was put into place in the 1820s to 1824 to 1840. And it was after some point after that time that they infiltrated the Democratic Party in dominating and became a dominant influence in the Democratic Party. And I'm going to show you how that was done. You can deny all you want to, but it's documented. And by the way, I can't sit here and give you every documentation. And I would venture to say that if you're demanding that of me, which is fine, but you watch the mainstream media, CNN, NBC, ABC, CBS, Fox, and you swallow their swill hook, line, and sinker without even questioning it, then you don't have a foot to stand on in asking me for anything or demanding it. But I will tell you that I've got the links in documentation, and if you go out on the internet, go to the library, you can research it for yourself and find exactly the same thing. It's really that simple. So, if you take a look at this whole thing, they infiltrated the Democratic Party, and then people from the Democratic Party keep shifting over to the Republican Party. The Libertarians remain isolated. The Independents remain isolated. And then came the Tea Party, and within a year, the Tea Party was swallowed by the Republican Party and done away with. And 2/3 of the Republican Party are really Democrats. And now we have all this reform coming out of all these actions to include affirmative action, economic reform, and to include universal income in it. And all of the parties were involved in it. The Democrats and Republicans all had everything to do with it. Now, on a state level, it's another ballgame, particularly when it comes to historical preservation. The federal government was all behind destroying historical significance of, let's say, monuments and things like that, whereas a lot of the states took a look at it and decided to stand against it. And then there was other moves to try to get around it. In any way, the Communist Party split from the Socialist Party in 1919, forming two competing Bolshevik parties, and later merged to become the Communist Party of America. So from 1919, just before the two-party system became a thing in the U.S., the Communist Party in Russia sent some envoys over to the U.S. and developed the Communist Party of America. And then we had the two-party system, Democratic and Republican Party, come into fruition within 13 years after that. From the inception of the Communist Party of America, it failed to get any foothold or headway in American politics, and so it turned to none other than the labor unions. And that's how they got their foothold into the Democratic Party, in the labor unions. So the labor union infiltration looks like this. Just prior to the policy that evolved into a popular front, the Soviet Union, through the Comintern, told the CPUSA to shut down its unsuccessful effort to compete with non-communist labor unions and begin working again within the non-communist unions. So who was the Communist Party of America taking their lead from? The communists in the Soviet Union. And by the way, they said they would take this country without a shot being fired. The so-called dual unionism program and its independent CPUSA controlled unions were disbanded by March of 1935. So the Communist Party had a public view in the unions, and then in 1935 they ran into trouble. But that doesn't mean that their influence and them being there did not remain. They began to work subvertly. In conjunction with the Popular Front's focus on accommodating Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal, the Great New Deal, the Communist Party of the USA found successful in its efforts to infiltrate and influence the non-communist labor unions movement. The biggest and most important opportunity occurred in 1935 when a disgruntled American Federation of Labor executive resigned to form a rival Congressional of Industrial Organizations, the CIO, and did so with strong assistance from the former organizations of the Trade Union Unity League. The Communist Party of USA recently disbanded the Dual Unionism Front. as percent of CIO unions had significant communist connections, the CIO would live on into the 1950s and merge with the rival AFL and become the modern AFL-CIO as we know it today. The Steelworkers Organization Committee was one significant success for the Communist Party of the USA and worked within the CIO. The name Cloyer and Haynes writes, at one point, more than 1/4 of the SWOC organizers were Communist Party members and affiliated, and with one secret communist official serving as a SWOC counsel and later holding the same position with the CIO. The SWOC was the precursor to the United Steel Workers. The United Auto Workers was another source of some early success for the Communist Party of America, infiltration with the CIO. Communists held their leadership rule in December of 1936 through 37 in a sit-down strike at General Motors in the Flint, Michigan plant, which led to the recognition of the UAW by GM and Chrysler. Battle for control of the UAW between communist and non-communist leaders ended when a non-communist, Walter Reuther Slate, won control of the union by 1940s, or in the 1940s. But by then, 40% of the unions were compromised by members of the Communist Party of America. And they were also CIO affiliates. They also made headway into the Transport Workers Union, the United Electrical and Radio and Machine Workers Union as well. The UAW tells the members, and I know for a fact that the UAW tells their members what to do, how to vote, and all that other stuff, and takes their money and puts it to these types of efforts. And I'm not saying that they don't represent their constituent membership in the workforce. That's not what I'm saying. But there is a two-pronged issue with the unions and having a majority of them, or a good portion of them, a good percentage of them, being Communist Party members of the USA. And I also want to make the statement that many federal and state workers civil servants are also members of these unions that have a lot of influence from the Communist Party of the USA. Then we'll go on. After expiration of most of the New Left, Communist Party USA policy, tactics, and effectiveness remained mostly unchanged from the mid-70s up through the collapse of the Soviet Union. So even into the 70s and into the 80s, the Communist Party of America maintained their influence in these ways in the rebranding of the United States. Do you understand why I keep bringing up communism in this country? Let me tell you, my grandfather came here from Nazi Germany to escape Hitler. I served in Korea for 13 months, along with some of my buddies that I am friends with to this day who actually went back to serve there again. And I did a good amount of time on the DMZ, documenting things in Panmunjom with my camera. I was face to face with the communist North Koreans. I have an awareness as to how they operate, along with historical basis. I don't say these things tongue-in-cheek. I recognize these things for what they are, and I call them what they are. Moving in the direction of its alliances with liberal Democrats, the CP, the Communist Party USA, ran its last independent presidential candidate, Gus Hall, for the fourth time in 1984. And in 1988 moved instead to support the left Democratic candidates. The migration of the political parties. Communist Party USA members and allies were supporters of and active in the presidential campaigns of Democratic Jesse Jackson and his Rainbow Coalition. They secretly, without any ado, support their alliances in the Democratic Party. That does not mean that they don't have influence in the Republican Party. Let me make that clear. They do. And I'm going to show you how that's done. Following the dissolution of the Soviet Union and its Communist Party, the newly constituted non-communist Russian government briefly opened access to some previously secret information. The Soviet espionage history. That revealed that the Communist Party of the USA engaged in spying against the United States. So while they were spying against the United States, they were infiltrating the United States and they were affecting the political landscape and the rebranding and the fundamental transformation of the United States of America. And here we are today. Go into that. There's all kinds of good facts in that. I'm not going to get into that. Let's take a look now at how this works. This is just really, really simple. So if you follow this with me and you understand that this is the CP of the USA, it is its own party. And then you have the Democrat Party. And then you have the Republican Party, the Repubs. And as I explained to you, that the CP USA tried to do its own thing over here, and then they figured out, by guidance of the Soviets, that they didn't do any good. They went into the unions and gained major, major influence over the unions. And then from there, the unions had ties specifically with the Democratic Party, being influenced by the Communist Party of America, which was also spying on the U.S. as a whole. The Communist Party of America began to, because they got nowhere like this, they were getting somewhere right here, the Communist Party of America began to support, with votes and with dollars, the Democratic Party. Why? Because they were most closely aligned with the Communist Party of America, which were part of the Soviet bloc coming out of the Bolshevik Revolution, two-party system. And then from that point on, we have seen over and over and over again Democrats coming over into the Republican Party. We see this all the time. By the way, the same thing's going on, well, from the Chinese standpoint of view. They've been getting into our parties as well. But primarily, since the 1920s, actually since 1919, and then the 20s, this is how this has been working. And so now what we have is we have a Democrat Party who is, and visibly so, communistic in nature. And many of those floated over to the Republican Party. So now we have a controlled opposition system. And Bill Clinton spoke of this. Bill Clinton basically admitted this when he was president, that the two-party system is basically controlled opposition. And controlled opposition, in essence, is the same thing. You then had the Tea Party, who came on the scene to get the American people to recognize all this. And then they got infiltrated and got sucked into the Republican Party, which is controlled by these by the way of buyouts and threats. And the Tea Party no longer exists. And this is how the migration of the political parties is carried on for the rebranding of the United States of America. I want to bring your attention to one other thought or aspect in this regard, and that is, since when have we began to call people who are leaders or heads of departments SARS in this country? Some say it goes back to the 30s, which would make sense. I don't remember it. I don't remember anybody being called a czar up until Obama became president, in which case he named individuals the czars of Economic Recovery and Advisory Board, czars of Energy Policy Office, czars of the Federal Energy Office Administration, and czars of this, that, and the other thing, czars of education and whatnot. But it would stand to reason, if that is true, because of the timeline of the Communist Party of America's infiltration into the political landscape in the United States of America. In reality, I just wanted to bring that up. I also want to bring to your attention the fact that we've had the revolutionaries of the likes of the Weather Underground, Bill Ayers and Bernadine, whatever her face name is, Dorn, who later became married, and their son actually, I was watching, their son actually put out a documentary video over an hour long, by which they admitted to all these atrocities, which they don't see as atrocities because the revolutionaries, of which they were the subject of the FBI's most wanted and on the most wanted list, while they were so-called distinguished professors of the University of Illinois. Like, they couldn't be arrested for some odd reason, but they were known to throw bombs across the country and blow up or attempt to blow up the World Trade Center, knock off armored cars, and try to bomb police in Los Angeles and whatnot. And I've got all the documentation here in front of me, and the fact that Obama and Clinton, though you can't find Clinton in this, other than Bill Clinton pardoned members of the Weather Underground when he was president, but Obama was a friend of these two, Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dorn, and actually started his Senate campaign in their house, in their living room, and the list goes on. And then he denies it in public the whole time. His book says another story about how he hates America. And I just wanted to bring that up because that too will tell you where we are, because the FBI was investigating them, had an FBI go in undercover for more than 10 years and document everything they were doing, but yet, just like all these other traitors in this country, they remain at large. They remain unhindered, and they remain walking the streets. And I've got pages and pages and pages of documentation on Bill Ayers, Bernadine Dorn, and Obama. And we had 8 years of Obama with hope and change and fundamental change in America. We also know that Hillary had studied the Saul Alinsky rules. These things boggle my mind. But what did Obama say? Without you, there will be no change. But yet we decide we're going to have these same types of people in office, in all forms of offices, including labor unions, over and over and over and over and over again. This is from the top down and the bottom up, folks. This is your Cloward and Piven strategy through and through, and it goes back a long, long ways. I've got so much here that I can't include. It's just, I don't have time for it. But we have the likes of Lindsey Graham at the Senate level, and Schumer, and Feinstein, and Pelosi, and Reid, and Clinton, and all these different ones who are all about the rebranding of the United States of America. Oh, the whole thing with what went on, all of the atrocities that went on in Obama's time. Actually, and I want to bring something out. So President Clinton had his deal in the Oval Office. He commuted or pardoned members of the Weather Underground who by default set off or conspired to set off multiple bombs across multiple locations across the country. Hillary Clinton conspired to sell public land that wasn't even hers to the Russians, called Uranium One. All these things went on. The email thing, you had, during Obama's years, you had Waco, Oklahoma City bombing. And in Obama's years, we had the nukes that Obama tried to set off on our shores, and that's documented, if you remember, and you can look it up. Lindsey Graham made the statement, he has warned South Carolinians about the threat of a terrorist nuclear attack on the same day that our exclusive high-level military intel revealed to us that nuclear warheads were being shipped to South Carolina from a major Texas Air Force base under an off-the-record black ops transfer from Dice Air Force Base, which by treaty with the Russians wasn't supposed to have any. Now, I'm going to go somewhere with this. You just hang with me. They found the CBS report entitled "Graham Nukes in the Hands of Terrorists Could Result in Bombs Coming to the Charleston border." The reports detailed Graham's warning that a lack of military action in Syria, and I remember him saying this, could result in a nuclear bombing in Charleston, South Carolina, the very destination of a black ops nuclear transfer out of Texas. Here's my point. Let's just cut through all this other stuff and let's just talk about this for a second. So Hillary and Bill went to Russia to evade the draft for Vietnam. Hillary had ties with the Saul Alinsky rules, and I remember seeing pictures with her in the Bill Ayers movement, but though I can't find any, the links are gone. Then you have all these ties with Obama. And now stop and think about this. All of the misses, all of the attempts of atrocities with the Weather Underground with Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dorn that didn't happen. But yet under Clinton, we had the Oklahoma City bombing and we had Waco. And under Obama, we had an attempt at nuclear detonation on our soil. Now, if you remember, immediately after that warning, Obama fired the Navy's number 2 nuclear commander, relieving him of command, saying that he had a gambling problem, which was never ever proven. The word is that he said, I will be the one that does not detonate a nuke on our soil. That goes against my oath. No charges were filed on his no charges have been brought against him for gambling, and his photograph does not look like a gambler. He might gamble, a little bit, but he does not look like one who is addicted to gambling, as Obama stated. And NCIS failed to find any evidence. In fact, defense officials say there is nothing to indicate there's been any compromise of STRATCOM's mission or classified materials in the matter involving this admiral. But yet Obama fired him. Why? Because Obama wanted to do what Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dorn attempted to do, and he wanted to do it bigger and better. Clinton's had some success with the Oklahoma bombing and with Waco. Obama had success with Fast and Furious and a few other things. But his main climax of his communist affiliation with a radical terrorist group called the Weather Underground failed, and that is the setting off of 3 massive nuclear devices on our eastern seaboard: New York City, Washington, D.C., and Charleston, South Carolina, under black ops. And that ought to tell you something about people following orders as well. So then we move on to the issue of the rewriting of history. The rewriting of history also falls into all of these things. And I just want to say, and we all know, that what happens every time a country goes in and invades another country and dominates another country? Does taking down the statue of Saddam Hussein in Iraq ring any bells? Does the upheaval in Egypt and the forward movement of the Muslim Brotherhood into Al Qaeda ring any bells? Then called the combination called ISIS or ISIL. Does the rewriting of history in Nazi Germany or Russia ring any bells? How about Cambodia? Let me give for you some thoughts as to why it's important to maintain a baseline for history. and why it's important for certain fundamental changes in history to take place if there's going to be a rebranding and a fundamental transformation of a country from one thing into another. We see from a biblical point of view that God told Israel to remember his covenant, which is between him and Israel and every living creature. No, I'm sorry, his living covenant with mankind. And every living creature, and the waters shall be no more, and the flood to destroy all flesh. And he will set a bow in the clouds, and he will look on it to remember his covenant, his everlasting covenant, between God and every living creature of all the flesh that is on the earth, that he would never again destroy it with flood water. And we see the transformation of the meaning of the rainbow, or the attempt of. Just saying. Joshua chapter 4, verses 6 and 7. When Israel came out of Egypt, and they crossed the Jordan River, and God told Joshua to call the leaders of the 12 tribes, and he said, gather 12 stones out of the midst of the Jordan River, and that this may be a sign to you when your children will ask, he said, to build a monument on this particular location, so that when your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, what mean ye by these stones? What does this monument mean? Then you shall answer them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. And when it passed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off, and these stones will be for a memorial unto the children of Israel forever. We're told in the New Testament that whatever was written in earlier times was written for our instruction, so that through perseverance and encouragement of the Scriptures we might have hope. You see, monuments are there for a reason. And when monuments come down, there's a reason for it. These monuments, and understand this, these monuments, the attack came in the name of decrying Confederacy and decrying slavery and decrying equality. And I get that. But also remember that the history written and taught in the South versus that which is taught in the North don't always line up together. When it comes to the Civil War, the North talks about slavery and proclamation of emancipation and forming of the Union for those reasons, as well as free trade from state to state, and maintaining that free trade. The South will tell you it had a whole lot less to do with slavery and a whole lot more to do with states' autonomy. I'm just putting that out there. there were this is where the cool thing is that at the federal level, the removal of monuments and statues was supported. At the state level, a lot of states said no. That's a cool thing. Trying to figure out what I want to include and what I don't. Also, those that want to remove these things also are saying that these statues represent white supremacy. It's kind of funny, funny, how the proponents of removing these statues will mimic the term racist and white supremacy, and at the same time erase the history that would teach future generations to not repeat the same mistakes and atrocities, while at the same time upholding and voting and supporting those who will bring their demise. And they do it generation after generation after generation. That's the crazy thing. That is what doesn't make any sense. That is just insane. Let me just go through some of these. I'm not going to go through that. It's kind of funny also that Virginia led the United States in taking down symbols. And those who wrote about these things, by and large, are bona fide parties of the Socialist Party of America or the Socialist Forum of the United States, known as the Democratic Socialists of America. And one young lady that I read, and I've got all here, and I don't think I'm going to read all this. The funny thing is, and the crazy thing is she's a Jewish girl with lineage that goes back into Poland when her family was being persecuted for being Jewish by communists and socialists and Nazis. And yet she is all for the same kind of political nonsense that would put the boot on the necks of her forefathers in lineage. Just so you know, her name is Rivka Majlish. Oh, I'm getting tired. Let's talk about the pros and the cons of removing some of these historical significant figures. By the way, when states said no, you're not going to do it, they took the authority out of the federal's hands, and then those came back for the monuments, and then they were sold off. And in other words, people were trying to find workarounds on both sides to keep them and to get rid of them. It was an internal war. According to the Southern Poverty Law Center, 59 Confederate statues and 9 markers or plaques were removed from public land in 19 states between June 17 of 2015, and July 6th of 2020, roughly 5 years and a couple of weeks. The SBLC reported that at least 160 monuments were removed in 2020 after the George Floyd's death. And by the way, to this day, mainstream media calls that an outright murder of a black man by a white man, when the evidence says that that police officer was vindicated and it was not murder, because George Floyd was not who the Pelosi and all these others purported him to be. The pros and the cons of removal of these things. The statues misrepresent the pros. The statues misrepresent history. Maybe. Depends on who's writing it. Depends on what really happened. And glorify people who perpetuate slavery, attempted secession from the United States, and lost the Civil War. Well, that statement in and of itself, depending on who you ask, could be an attempt to rewrite history. The statues are a painful reminder of past and present institutionalized racism in the United States. That could also be a true or false statement. And I would say it kind of is a true statement. But the fact of the matter is, a painful reminder is always better than an actual revisitation. Then there are also many other people who could be represented by statues who would better represent the historical progress and diversity of the country. Yeah, there could be. Or you resurrect those to show both sides of what it was and what it can be, without destroying your history. The cons. The statues represent the country's history, no matter how complicated. Taking them down is to censor, whitewash, and potentially forget history. Duh. Removing statues is a slippery slope that could lead to the brash removal of monuments to the slightest problem to any slightly problematic person. Duh. The statutes do not cause racism and could be used to fight racism if put into historical context. Duh. Now, if you connect the dots, you will find that the rebranding in political, historical, educational, and religious is all tied together. And I mentioned from the very beginning, this all comes down from the UN and includes a religious common core ideology. And it affects the top down and the bottom up. It's coming from every angle. We can talk about economic reform. Think about the gold to fiat currency. Think about the fiat currency taken off of the gold standard. Then we have the convolution of free enterprise versus capitalism versus nationalism. Free enterprise and capitalism is being interchanged as the same thing. Now, they are related, but they're two different things. And then we have the convolution politically and economically of democracy and the economic system. Democracy and the economic system has been interchanged and being the same category, opposing capitalism and the free enterprise system. So you can immediately see that in this category, we can take some of it right back to the redefining of words. And that begs the question, what is capitalism? What is free enterprise? What is democracy? What is a republic? What is fascism? And what is red fascism? And what is communism? And what is socialism? How do the tactics contradict to fit the category? Does universal income ring a bell in this whole thing? And how does a dependence on a global economy and distribution of goods and services versus sustainability ring a bell? How about the Build Back Better Biden thing and the influx of illegal immigrants? Do all of these things ring a bell? I think those things are self-explanatory. We also need to take a look at the restructuring of the family, the defining of a family, and the basis and fundamentals of a society. And you may not like what I have to say, but I've got one thing to say about that. Actually, two. One is, yeah, you might want to do your own thing. That's your own thing. But based on the fundamentals of a family structure, particularly when it comes to same-sex marriage versus heterosexual marriage, all I have to say is give it one generation and same-sex marriage will actually annihilate itself. One generation. How's that? Because you can't procreate, which is the definition of the expansion of the family from a husband and wife to having offspring. One generation. So when you want to redefine a family structure as well as the sexes as it is biblically understood, you will destroy your own premise in one generation. And yet, the rebranding of America is also being had under the guise of the restructuring of the defining of sexuality and genderism. What is it to be a separate gender? And what were you born as? And what is your defining role as such? Not value, not talking about value, because you'll lose that debate. We're talking about the roles of gender with equal value. We notice this began, maybe I'm wrong, but we notice it began, we notice its thing from the hippie movement of freewheeling sex and drugs, love the one you're with, rather than love one. And then we saw it being tied into the educational system with freedom of sex through the sex ed, and then through abortion on demand and Roe versus Wade without parental knowledge or consent in many states, including Michigan, which I already suggested in other areas of education. And these states who purport such fundamental educational philosophies literally transported their female students, their young girls, across state lines where abortion was legal without parental knowledge or consent. Remember I said, Michigan said, when your child gets on the bus, they're no longer your child. And in sex education, this was the outcome. It's documented. Go look it up. During Obama's tenure of being president, sex ed became open and regenderization or transgender movement became a thing of opportunity. And it went down all the way down to the first grade level. And it included handing out condoms and just disgusting sex ed and fisting kits. And now we have transgender, identifying as animals, identifying as plants, and organ rearranging and hormone transitioning therapy and chemical castration, all kinds of nasty stuff going on. And I'm going to read for you some of this stuff because it just is the way it is, and many of you may not know it, and many of you may think it's a conspiracy. So this emerging new type of conservatism is also including the international dimension that Russia has played a role in shaping. It is based on the defense of traditional and national values as a culture, and in opposition to liberal values such as the right for sexual minorities and openness to immigration. There is a deep and growing connection between Russia and the parts of Christian right in the United States, which, based on common opposition to gay marriage and on Vladimir Putin's promotion of Russia as a Christian country. Russia in recent years has lent moral and financial support to European populists, as well as including Marine Le Pen's National Rally, the former National Front, in France, and Matteo Salvini Lega in Italy. And I guess that had some kind of influence in America's educational system. That would kind of stand to reason, since the CPUSA has influence over the labor unions as well as major influence in the Democratic Party, and then therefore into the Republican Party, and therefore into the politics known as the bipartisan slash dual party slash controlled opposition slash it's really one party slash the rebranding slash the fundamental changes of America that both Clinton and Obama and now Biden have purported. And the Bushes. But we found that under Obama, that in March of 2000, the Gay and Lesbian Straight Education Network, otherwise known as GLSEN, of Massachusetts, held its 10th year anniversary at the Boston Conference at Tufts University. This conference was fully supported by the Massachusetts Department of Education, the Safe Schools Program, and the Governor's Commission on Gay and Lesbian Youth, and some of the presenters received federal money. During the 2000 conference, workshop leaders led a youth-only, now listen to this, led a youth-only ages 14 through 21 session that offered lessons in a dangerous sexual practice. During another workshop, activists asked 14-year-old students, do you spit or do you swallow? Is it rude? The unbelievable audio clip is posted here in Obama's Safe School and is posted here. So this article actually posted the clip. Then Obama's Safe School czar, Kevin Jennings, who is also the founder of GLSEN, said he was paid $273,573.96 as the executive director in 2007 of the GLSEN. Jennings was a keynote speaker at the 2000 conference. Of which fisting kits were distributed. You figure out what fisting kits are. Unfortunately for the GLSEN, undercover journalists with masked with mass resistance recorded these outrageous sessions. The audio was later leaked to a local radio station. This created such an uproar that GLSEN leaders were forced to apologize for the disgusting behavior. Thanks to Soros-linked Media Matters, we now know that GLSEN director and current Obama Safe School czars Kevin Jennings was confronted on the vile content discussed at the Children's Conference. And like the Parents' Rights Coalition and Department of Education, GLSEN is also troubled by some of the content that came up during the workshop. Oh, really? You sponsored it. You put it out there. You distributed it. And you got federal funding. He said people who run the workshop in the future will get clearer guidelines through Jennings, though Jennings said the network annual conference at Tufts University should not be judged on the 30-student seminar. What they didn't tell you about the queer sex and sexuality in health class. We need to make our expectations and guidelines to outline facilitators much more clear, because we are surprised and troubled by some of the accounts we've heard. And yet, but despite Media Matters claims, Kevin Jennings and the GLSEN organization did nothing to clean up their act. And in fact, in 2001, they handed out fisting kits again to the children and teachers who attended the conference. And then there was an estimated 400 student attendees was given their own fisting kits. It went from 30 to 400. More students attended this year, approximately 650 attendees, about 400 of these were students, and plastic gloves, kits of plastic gloves intended for fisting and oral sex were distributed at the Planned Parenthood table in the lobby. Public funds were used for the event, with at least 2 school buses being used to transport students from Methuen High School and Marblehead Public Schools. Adam Glick, conference coordinator, said he did not know how these buses were paid for. Other children were transported by public school teachers in private cars. Then private homosexual sponsor GLSEN is given state funds for purposes and does not publicly report how the money is spent. This is from the same person that Obama appointed as czar over federal education. Now do you see how the influx of the rebranding of America through the education and by sexual transgendering and the redefining of the gender roles, as well as the redefining of definitions, are fundamentally transforming and programming our generations for the future. Then Obama killed funding for abstinence-only sex education. So on one hand, they're funding all this other nonsense, and then on the other hand, they killed the federal funding for abstinence-only sex education. So then we see, and that's how we see, the rebranding of America sexually. And last but not least, let's take a look at the religious rebranding in One Nation Under Who. So under the religious branding of America, or rebranding of America, I want to make one thing clear, that I support the freedom of religion. I do. If there's not freedom of religion for anybody, there's not freedom of religion for anybody. In the Constitution of the United States, whether you agree with somebody's religion or not, gives them the freedom to exercise their religious convictions freely. As a Christian, I respect and uphold that. Now, this rebranding of the USA really needs, or demands a series in and of itself, which is beyond the scope of what I am doing here, and I'll try to touch on it briefly and more in depth at a later point. Perhaps that will be at the One Nation Under Who video. However, as a Christian nation with freedoms of religion, a Christian nation, while everybody has the freedom and the right to exercise their own freedom of belief system, one nation under God, you would think, would make decisions based on biblical concepts and principles, which in effect would benefit everybody, with blessings in life. God causes the sun to shine on the just and the unjust, same with the rain. And when you live by biblical principles as a Christian nation, you reap some of that benefit, whether you agree with it or not. If you're honest, you reap the benefit of being honest. And you don't have to tell lies. You don't have to cover your own tracks. It's just a little example. But in the church, there has been a rebranding of biblical concepts, such as love. Love, love, love. Judge not lest you be judged. And all this comes down from the UN. Psychology versus theology. Psychology versus divinity. And that would determine the difference between a psychological and humanistic worldview versus a biblical worldview versus a scientifically biblical-based worldview. It also includes mysticism in the church, and it also includes the misunderstanding, the misrepresentation, the change of the word, and the misuse of the word tolerance. In reality, over the past 4 decades, the user-friendly church or the seeker-friendly church model has been built around psychology, not a biblical worldview. They're tapping into what people think they want versus what God calls the church to be. Therefore, the church has become a product of the world, winning the world's way to please the world. You can't get around it. I personally call this sustainability versus souls. It's the difference between sustainability versus discipleship. It's the difference between sustainability versus love your neighbor as yourself. And science and education and economy have become our gods, and hence we are our own gods. And this is spilling into the rebranding of the religious front in the churches in the United States of America. There's a lot of talk of love from everyone, and they have no idea what it means. I'm not going to get into that here. I'll get into that in another video. And at its core, I'll just read this. At its core, love is meeting the needs and not the wants. It is doing what is right and not doing less has less to do with what somebody's personal agenda is. Of course, until it persuades someone into that which is not needed done by persuasion. In other words, you don't need to persuade somebody to love you. You just don't, or to love. You teach them what it is, they follow God, they do it. In the matter of presenting love, particularly in a spoken word, the word spoken out of love should be such that the truth is presented, and the one receiving it has the room to make an informed decision one way or the other. Same goes for judge not lest you be judged. Simply put, this has been blown out of context and its intent and its meaning, and when someone says this, they really mean don't speak the truth to me because I want to do what I want to do regardless of whether it is right or wrong and regardless of the consequences. Just so you know, there are at least 9 variations of the Greek original language of the word judge in the New Testament Greek. And so the person that says, judge not lest you be judged, generally speaking, doesn't have a clue as to what they're talking about. And the bottom line is that we don't sit on the throne of God to determine who is worthy of eternal life and who is not. That is the bottom line. I can explain that in detail. I'm not going to in this video. We are called to discern right from wrong. If you weren't called to discern right from wrong, then you shouldn't have been taught to look both ways when crossing the street when you were in the first grade or in kindergarten. And to make a decision that crossing the street, walking in front of a car, walking in front of a moving vehicle, walking in front of an 18-wheeler or a train is simply not a good idea. It's real simple, people. In Ephesians, we are told, and in Philippians, actually in Ephesians we're told, and we're called to discern right from wrong. We're called to expose the deeds of darkness because we are supposed to do what is right. And according to love, we discern right from wrong and we discern needs from wants. Ephesians 1:9 says that Paul said, I pray that your love abounds more and more in all discernment. Why? Because you can't love somebody if you don't discern what they need. And the word discern in the Greek comes from one of the words judge. Not the word krino, as in judge not, because you don't sit on the judge throne to determine a sentence of life or death for eternity. But why in the church do we not simply teach the Word of God and give this country pure religion that is undefiled and that takes care of the widows and the orphans in their distress? Psychology versus divinity and biblical doctrine. Now, I've been tracking this trend for 30 years. Psychology has all but overtaken the preaching, the pulpits, and the teaching in the churches across the United States. Guess who perfected psychology in its earliest forms? Hitler, Stalin. Do they ring a bell? Coupled with chemical concoctions and experimentation on Christians and Jews and dissenters, they use psychology and chemistry combined to do experiments on people for the sake of mind control and physical control. But nobody remembers that today. We just take what they have perfected, put it into use, and call it psychology. And that psychology, in turn, turns around and says psychologically, you need this prescription and that prescription. And that stuff is throughout the church. The rebranding of religion in American society. It is also shown in what we would consider you need professionals to counsel one another's, and you need professionals to strip back the layers of people's problems to get to the core issue. When in reality, the biblical merit is such that Hebrews 4:12 says it is the word of God that is quick, powerful, or living and powerful, sharper than any two-edged sword. It divides or piercing as far as the division of soul and spirit, both the joints and the marrow, and able to judge the thoughts and intents of the heart. Not psychology, the word of God. Galatians 6:1 says, Brethren, even if a man is caught in a trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of meekness or gentleness, looking to yourself, lest you also be tempted. 2 Corinthians 1:4 and 5. 2 Corinthians 1:4 and 5. Comfort one another, or you are comforted by the Holy Spirit and by Christ, so that in all your afflictions you may be able to comfort those who are in any affliction with the comfort with which we receive by God. For just as the sufferings of Christ are ours in abundance, so are the comforts in abundance through Christ. And in Romans 15:14, Paul said, concerning you, brethren, I am convinced that you yourselves are full of goodness, filled with all knowledge, and able to admonish one another. So once again, rather than relegating what is a biblical mandate by God to simple people, rather than relegating them to professionals who rely on world standards rather than the Word of God, why don't we work with the Word of God, do what it says to do, because other than that, you are being a participant in the rebranding of the religious landscape in the Church of America. And this is coming down through the UN. I've already showed you that. Manifesting in the church has been rebranded as vision casting and projecting. It does not rely on what God said when Jesus said, I will build my church. It relies on what man thinks the church ought to look like in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, a couple of years, 5 years, 10 years, a decade, half, whatever it is, down the road. Which leads to the user-friendly church and the seeker-friendly church. And this stuff is being taught in seminaries across our land, along with psychology. Trust me, I know, because I've seen, being on pulpit committees, I've seen stacks of resumes this thick of psychology majors when there's only one or two divinity majors or theology majors for preachers. Been there, done that. Nothing to do with biblical discipline or biblical discipleship and teaching of the Word of God. Oh, there's parts of the Word of God being taught, but it is something other than what God is saying to teach. And because of this model, we decide we need to build programs and systems around the psychology and the laws of attraction to bring people in. And all of this costs money, and all of a sudden you have a massive bill to pay, and so the pews are not full, and now you have a need to be for sustainability, and now you have problems. And this is how this cycle works. And this is how the church is neutered in this country to lack its light. Paul told Timothy in 1 Corinthians 4, the Spirit explicitly says, in the latter times some will fall away from the faith, paying attention to deceitful spirits and doctrines of demons, by means of hypocrisy, and liars seared with their own conscience as a branding iron, who forbidden marriage abstain from foods which God has created to be gratefully shared with those who believe and know the truth. 2 Timothy 3, but realize in the last days difficult times will come, for men will be lovers of self, of money, boastful, arrogant, revilers, disobedient to parent, ungrateful, unholy, and lovers of unloving, irreconcilable, malicious gossips, without self-control, brutal, haters of good, treacherous, reckless, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, holding to a form of godliness, although denying its power. We are to avoid such men and such systems and such teaching as these. Paul goes on to name a couple of these types of men in his day. And so you can see the rebranding of the United States of America on these 7 fronts. The reshaping of America has been underway for decades and decades and decades, and it is nearly complete. Now, as my son has said, if you're not offering a solution, you're a part of the problem. Now, I've alluded to the solutions by bringing light to the steps and the problems. I've alluded to the solutions. I will bring solutions in videos 3 and 4, Mirror, Mirror on the Wall, taking a look at ourselves rather than pointing the finger, and One Nation Under Who. I have, in fact, alluded to inferring with laying out the problems, but I will get to those. And so this concludes this video. I thank you for watching, and once again, I ask that you will go to Etsy and just take a look at my landscape photo products, and which we are working on more products, and as well as our website, and I will hopefully see you in the next video. And by the way, Freedom and Survival is a part of Timotheus Enterprises, and so you're seeing both logos. Freedom and Survival talks about politics, current events, and self-sustainability, whereas Timotheus Enterprises is the umbrella of all of this, as well as the venue for photography, video, and business. Thank you very much, and have a good night.